Hi, there's a very useful newsletter. It comes out every week. It's called Glassnode Insights, which shows the on-chain activity on the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's not just an analysis of price data. It actually looks at what are different wallets doing? How long are people holding Bitcoin? How actively are certain people trading? And using that kind of data can give us hints of where Bitcoin is in the overall macro cycle. So that's the newsletter here, Glassnode Insights. Link is also in the video description. And in the recent newsletter here published on the 14th of January, there are a few very interesting charts. And one of those charts hints at a potential momentum shift. And so in this video, we're going to look at what I think are the most important charts of that newsletter. So first of all, we've got the holder net position change. So what does it look at? It looks at, do people tend to rather sell or do they rather tend to buy right now? And what you can see here, so this chart here includes, for example, the bull run of 2017. What you can see is that during a bull run, the long-term holders, they start to take profits, right? And then once prices decline, they tend to buy. And what we've also seen is after a very strong capitulation, right? So this is when we went from 20K all the way down to 6. After that additional 50% drop in price, people got really bearish. They stopped believing in Bitcoin long-term and they even sold at low prices. That's not the typical behavior of this metric. Usually what we see is whenever prices tend to increase, that people tend to sell off. And so we had this long-term accumulation phase from Q3 of 2019 to Q3 of 2020. After we had accumulated all of this, then we were able to get to the next bull run, right? Then the supply was dried up enough to allow for a bull run, and the long-term holders, they sold during that bull run. And what do we see right now? We see again long-term accumulation, similar to what we have seen over here. So nobody knows how long this has to occur, right? We might be just halfway through this, so maybe we continue to go another half year or so, just like this. But at least what this means is people are not scared right now. People continue to accumulate, and the longer this happens, the more pressure we build up for, in the end, creating another rally for Bitcoin. So this current sideways movement that we're in for like the last half year does not mean at all that people are forgetting about Bitcoin. This is simply, at least that's how I interpret this, another phase where people continue to buy and dry up the supply. So over the long term, that supply squeeze might turn into higher prices. Now, this could potentially be the most important chart of this entire newsletter, and that's the dormancy flow. And dormancy flow relates to how long people are holding their Bitcoin. So we can see when this value is particularly low, right? So in gray, we see the long-term Bitcoin chart, right? On a logarithmic scale, this is the price. In orange, we see this dormancy flow. Whenever this dormancy flow had been very low, we had historically great buying opportunities here. Look at this. This was an incredible buying opportunity after the Mt. Gox hack, right? That's what caused this bear market. Then again here, after the final capitulation in 2018, where we went from 6 to 3K, we also had this dormancy flow very low. Then again, the Corona crash. We barely touched it here during the summer lull of last year. And now we are again very low on this. It doesn't mean we can't go lower, right? During the Corona crash, we did come lower. So it doesn't mean we have to be now at the absolute bottom. But if you just take this measure, at least it doesn't look like Bitcoin is particularly expensive right now. So of course, these are very long-term considerations, right? And the daily fluctuations of Bitcoin, they are quite high. So maybe we could go down another 30 or 40%, who knows? But if your time horizon is long enough, if you buy now and you hold for, say, the next 2 or 3 years, a lot of models suggest that we are not particularly expensive right now. So I personally think that's a relatively safe bet. It's probably an easier bet than trying to find out what's the best altcoin right now. Simply buying Bitcoin now and holding it over, say, 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 years is, in my humble opinion, of course, no financial advice, a relatively safe bet. I would go even as far to say it might even make sense to, instead of just dollar cost averaging and buy every month for like the next 2 or 3 years, maybe it makes sense to get a personal loan now for like the next 2 or 3 years. And pay off that loan over those 2 or 3 years, where you're effectively still dollar cost averaging in, right? But instead of buying for the prices that develop over the next 2 or 3 years, this could potentially be cheaper than the average price that you get over the next 2 or 3 years. Potentially, right? You definitely have to consider your own risk tolerance here. And I don't want to talk anybody into taking on more risks than they can handle. But looking at different models, and this is one of them, this might be a time that rather leans towards buying than towards selling. That's at least how I see it right now. I'm currently buying Bitcoin. I'm not selling at all. And it looks like I'm not alone with that assessment. So when everybody believes that the price will rise in the future, then nobody will sell, right? And everybody will buy. And so this becomes self-fulfilling, right? The price will actually rise simply because everybody believes in it. Now here's another interesting data point on Bitcoin, something I wasn't aware of before. So this is the futures open interest for the perpetual futures. That's basically a speculation vehicle on Bitcoin. So if you want to speculate on short-term movements of the Bitcoin price, you can, instead of buying Bitcoin itself, engage in a futures contract. And these kind of contracts, they don't expire. These are special kinds of future contracts. And what you can see is that over the very long term, this open interest in those speculative vehicles, it increases. So now we are at a pretty high value for that, which would potentially imply that there is quite a bit of leverage in the market, which can be dangerous very short term, right? Look at these elevated levels before. They tended to precede a price decline, or one could say a deleveraging. And so where are those kind of contracts being opened? That's mainly on Binance. So we see it's mainly speculators on Binance that open up these levered positions. So this is where the differentiation between long-term and short-term comes into play. Short-term, this actually might look dangerous. People might get liquidated, and this could mean in both directions. This could mean a sharp increase or a sharp decline, but simply more leverage means that the price is unlikely to stay as calm as it has been in, say, the last days or weeks. So that's the short-term. The long-term, however, points towards Bitcoin's price being relatively low, historically speaking. But it does not necessarily say that we have already found the bottom. So that's why if you want to be in it for the long term, if you want to simply participate in the story that Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation, that there's never more than 21 million of them, then at least you're unlikely to buy now with the prospects of having to endure, say, another 80% drop, right, during a crypto winter when excitement is very high. Excitement around Bitcoin currently is not high at all. And we can see this not just here, we can also see this in relative valuation to, for example, Ethereum, or when we look at Bitcoin dominance. Bitcoin dominance is also at historically low levels. So here's another chart regarding the futures activity, and it shows a more refined picture of what's actually going on with those speculative positions, right? We are at an all-time high of open futures interest. So a lot of people are currently speculating on Bitcoin. But what we also see is that the active trading of those futures is relatively low. So in other words, this is simply leverage that's building up over time. It's not necessarily the speculators becoming increasingly active. It's simply that they haven't been liquidated for a long time. And that makes sense, right? We have been in this sideways trading range for Bitcoin for a long time without massive volatility. And so these positions, these future positions, they simply build up over time, even without the necessity of settling those futures contracts. So the trading activity isn't particularly high, but the leverage that has been built up over time is. And so the question is simply, in what kind of direction will this break out, right? It very much looks like a sharp movement to the upside or to the downside is going to happen. The direction, though, is not clear. But the message of this video is simply, you don't have to necessarily worry about these short-term fluctuations. I think one can be fairly certain that Bitcoin will be higher in 2 or 3 years than it is today. And with that certainty, you can simply just buy and hold and forget about it for quite a while. That's at least how I personally approach this with the largest part of my portfolio. I also have another part of my portfolio that I actively trade, where I simply go inside and outside of altcoins whenever overall momentum is bullish, which on the short term, it doesn't seem to be. But for the long-term position, right, for the vast majority of my crypto investment, I simply buy and hold. And what's the asset you should buy and hold over the long term? It's probably the one where you have most certainty that it's still going to be around after all those years. And I think with Bitcoin, that's pretty certain. There's less certainty for other crypto assets, right? Ethereum has quite a bit of competition with other smart contract platforms that are more efficient. applications built on the blockchain, so for example games, they might also become less popular over time. But Bitcoin is the sound money. It's got all of this capital behind it, and so I don't think there's a rational case to be made that Bitcoin will be completely forgotten in a few years from now, especially given all this money printing that's currently going around. If you enjoyed this video, you're probably also going to enjoy the content of the premium membership. We've got daily market updates on Bitcoin, on Ethereum. We've also got a private chat where you can ask me any questions, and of course exclusive content around topics such as portfolio construction. Feel free to also like this video. It will help the channel grow. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. I publish videos regularly. Last but not least, there's also a public Telegram channel. Simply search for Bitcoin Strategy channel within the Telegram app. We are around 1,600 people now. See you next time. Bye-bye.